Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the SAS Talk Show, where we explore real issues affecting the Sikh Panth. Today, we're discussing a growing and a deeply concerning issue, emerging cults in Sikhi, not even just at a local Punjab level, but at a global level. This is a very concerning issue because a lot of innocent Sikhs are being manipulated into these cults. They're using Gurbani and they're using Sikhi as that disguise to hide behind, but their motive is something else. Today, Dr. Jules, who's actually spent about 8 years inside a group known as 3HO, founded by Harbhajan Singh Yogi, who also use Sikh identity, symbols, and language to build a spiritual lifestyle. But behind the appearance of meditation, the white clothes, and the turbans, it turned out to be what many now recognize as a psychologically controlling cult. I know sometimes when we use the word cult, we think, hey, this is going too extreme. We'll talk with Dr. Jules about this. She was part of the organization. She was in there for about 8 years. She will share her experiences while living there and how the innocent minds are manipulated. Dr. Jules has basically dedicated her work helping people understand the cult psychology, how intelligent people, good-hearted people can be trapped in systems that look spiritual on the outside, but can be controlling and harmful. Dr. Jules, we welcome you. Thank you for giving us the time and the opportunity to join us today at the SAS Talk Show. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Now, Dr. Jules, I'm going to turn over to you. So basically, if you can briefly just give a little bit about your background and how you got into Sikhi and what you know about it and how you got into your organization.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for having me on. This is
Thank you.
one of my passions is sort of speaking about some of these topics. And because it deeply affected me, I think that it's really important to help share these stories. So my first career was in the entertainment industry. So I lived in New York City and then I moved to Los Angeles where I lived for over a decade. And shortly into my time in Los Angeles, I attended a yoga and meditation class.
Okay.
And that class was Kundalini yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan.
Okay.
And the experience that I had in that class, physiological experience, a somatic experience, it was different than anything I had had before. And from there, I decided to check out a studio that was within walking distance from where I lived that
Okay.
exclusively taught Kundalini yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. My first class there at that Kundalini yoga studio got invited to a festival that was put on by the 3HO, the Happy, Healthy, Holy organization, which is at its core a group of people who loosely, I mean, some of them with more fanaticism, follow some principles of Sikhi. And I just did a deep dive into it for reasons that we can discuss. And then for the next basically 8 years of my life, I was deeply involved with the group. I had a background in anthropology, which was my undergraduate college major. And I really loved learning about different groups of people and was seeing things from a cultural lens. And I was completely and totally fascinated by what I was witnessing and learning, both within the group. And then that led me on several trips to India, but then also trips to Canada and other places where there's a fairly large Punjabi diaspora, the UK, things like that. So anyway, that's how I got involved with learning about Sikhi in the first place and with this group that is very arguably a cult that loosely follows Sikhi. So there you go. Yeah.
Thank you. And what do you think psychological, emotional needs do you think the group fulfilled initially when you started attending those classes that drew you more into it?
Yeah. So when I first attended a class, I was 28 years old. And at that time in my life, it was really interesting. There were 6 people, family members and friends, who all transitioned, died, passed on, within a
Mhm.
matter of 6 months. And that was happening right before and then sort of during this time when I was starting to spend more time with this group.
Okay.
And I also had recently gone through sort of back to back two very emotionally impactful breakups.
Okay.
One with a man who, I thought I was going to get married to, and then another one, a very significant personal relationship. But I also was pursuing that career in the entertainment industry, which is in and of itself, it's a very challenging and difficult to navigate. It's a tough road.
Yeah.
So I had I had a lot of grief and a lot of turmoil that I was experiencing. And
Mhm.
I was looking for relief. I was
Okay.
looking for a paradigm within which to understand these experiences that I was going through.
Mhm.
And what the teachings of this group provided was not only an entire framework within which to understand things that
Mhm.
happen, like, such as death and grief, but also gave me sort of a plug and play with an instant family, an instant community. And then the yogic practices that they were doing are designed to have you feel states of euphoria and then awe, and
Mhm.
that is then conflated with this concept of
Right.
God. And so it's like, and they within the teachings, it's like you have to, and we could talk more about this, of course, but you have to
Right.
keep coming back to the group, keep doing these practices so that you can feel this way. And then
Mhm.
built into the group dynamics is if you do more, like there's always more that you could be doing. If you plug into
Right.
us even more, even more, even more, then you'll feel even better. There's a
Even better.
prescriptive nature to it. And then also the twist is that you have to keep coming here, which then ends up
Right.
becoming a kind of control. So that's kind of how I sank into it, is that I
Second.
was in a state of vulnerability at that
Right.
time in my life, and I was looking for something to help me feel better. And this group and its practices not only
It gave you
provided
that.
that, gave me
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had a chance to actually watch your documentary, The Breath of Fire. Yes. And the interesting thing that majority of, or pretty much all of the individuals that were talking in the documentary that got pulled into the group all had similar experiences in their life about vulnerability where they were seeking some sort of comfort or something. They had some things happen into their life. And initially when they went there, they felt that comfort, that awe, that euphoria in those classes. Now, if you mind talking about a little bit about the psychology behind that when people go into these classes or into these groups and the things that they do, and they get that sense of that awe, that euphoria, what's the psychology behind it and the physiology behind it? Do they, like, I feel like they know that if we do this, this is what these people are going to experience. Psychologists can bring a group of people into a room and do certain things. They can all experience what they want them to experience, actually.
Yeah. So I'm just going to back up a little bit for anybody who maybe has not heard about some of these things.
Hmm.
So there was a man, Harbhajan Singh Puri, and
Hmm.
he immigrated to first Canada and then to the United States in the late 1960s. And he had been a hatha yogi in New Delhi. And then he
Hmm.
also had, for a time, been stationed in Amritsar. So he had this yogic background. And when he came to Canada, at the time, there wasn't a huge Punjabi population there just yet. He starts talking about himself, and people are like, "Oh, you know yoga? You should teach yoga. This is a hot thing right now." This was the
Right.
time of the hippies and the cultural revolution that was happening in the 1960s into the 70s. And so he started teaching yoga. The reason he actually left Canada, I want to say he was in the Greater Toronto area. I can't remember offhand, but you can find it online.
Okay.
He actually got a woman pregnant
In Canada?
in Canada. And mind you, he
Okay.
had a wife and 3 children back in Delhi.
Okay.
So
Okay.
anyway, this was, the signs were already there. Anyway, so then via his social network, he, moves to Los Angeles. He knew somebody in the Los Angeles area. And then that was like, California. There were all these young people, and he was tall. He was kind of a burly guy, very muscular, and he presented himself with a brightly colored pug, and he had always nice clothes, right?
Mhm.
And so he just was very exotic. And to these gori, you know, hippie yoga students, he
Mhm.
was just presenting as a guru.
A guru.
And
Yeah.
he just immediately fell into that role. Whether or not he was consciously trying to have power and control and create a cult,
Mhm.
that's kind of what happened. He had
He
all
kind
of
of
these.
fell into it, and he got a little power, and that kind of got to his head and say, "I can use this," and then basically take a rush off of it.
Well, there's this, he's surrounded by these 18 to 24-year-old white women who are
Mhm.
extremely eager, also seeking,
Mhm.
excited to learn from the man from India, excited to learn
Right.
yoga. And so his background, one of his parents was Hindu and the other was Sikh. And
Okay.
he actually went through partition when he was a teenager. So he kind of
Mhm.
came of age during this very tumultuous time, in the history of South Asia. And his family they were refugees. They went to Delhi. And that's actually where he met his wife was,
Okay.
in the refugee where they all ended up because her family was as well. So he was from, I don't remember. I think he was from Sialkot. It was a small town, but anyway, in
Sailcoat. Okay.
what's now Pakistan. So
Right.
but he grew up going to it was a Christian, a Protestant English, a school that had these white English speaking teachers. And it's
Okay.
during this time of partition. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think that it's important into
Right.
understanding the psychology of him and what happened. And so then anyway, he goes on, gets married, has children. He's working as a government employee. I want to say he was a customs officer.
Mhm.
And he ends up coming here to North America. And all of a sudden, he's surrounded by these young, eager white women, and they're throwing themselves at him. And he starts testing the boundaries of this. Like,
Right.
as a yoga teacher who's teaching them yoga, let me
Mhm.
put my hand on a part of your body. And these women just went with it.
Mm.
And, he's like, "Well, this
Yeah.
is all," it's like a kid in a candy store to him. He's
Right.
like, "Well, this
Right.
is
Right.
all for me." So he was peppering in, along with these, hatha teachings, bits of Ayurveda and then bits of Sikhi. Now,
Mhm.
it's also important to recognize he didn't actually read or know Gurumukhi. He knew
Yeah.
Shamukhi.
Okay.
So
We had that discussion, and I was kind of surprised. If you want to share a little bit about that as well, please.
yeah, so he had an understanding of Bonnie and sort of the meanings of it and stuff. But here's the thing, and whether it's kind of cultural or he, again, sort of got swept up in the flow of what was going on, he was very prone to using hyperbole. So, for example, like he would talk about the Amrit Vela, right? And
Mhm.
he would give like, what's the pori? Amrit Vela Satana Variya Vichar, right? Like
Vadai Vichar. Yeah.
he would say that, but then he would
Okay.
say, if you meditate at this time, this ambrosial hour, right, then your third eye, your crown chakra will open 10,000 times more brightly than if you're meditating at 4 in the
Mhm.
afternoon. Now, of course, there is a science, there is an effect of
Mhm.
meditating before the sunrise.
Right.
I'm not doubting that, I'm not denying that, but the way he
Right.
would frame it, right, is that
Mhm.
this is the way you have to do it. So, and
Mhm.
if you do it this way, then, all these amazing things are going to happen to you. But he would also
Right.
take other, other parts of Japji Sabodis or other Bani, and he would say, okay, so, Guru Ram Das said this, and this means this. And if you combine this with Kriya, okay, definition of Kriya is, so this is now getting into more yoga stuff. So
Right.
Kriya is where you can combine like chanting mantra. So you're putting, if you want to call it sound current or vibration or, words,
Mhm.
you're putting that along with mudra. So that's a positioning of your hands, your body. Okay. So mantra,
Right.
mudra, and then he would do prana. So prana is the breath. So you're
Right.
using the body, specifically the breath, and then you're bringing in mantra. So what he would do is he
Right.
would combine those into exercises that you
Mhm.
would do with repetition to create certain physiological effects within the body. And the way he
Mhm.
taught that was interwoven with aspects of Sikhi. So what ended up getting created was
Yeah.
this meditative state that people would get into by following what he was doing. He would say, continue, go, 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 like keep going, keep going, keep
Mhm.
going. And
Right.
so that then has these sort of, biophysiological effects upon the body, whether it is something like hypoxia, which is a state
Right.
of low oxygen because you're doing this like crazy breath work, you know,
Mhm.
or a state of, some sort of a neuronal circuit because you're
Mhm.
repeating something so much, or beta endorphins because you're
Right.
holding a position for so long. So, what all of these practices ended up doing was creating states of basically euphoria
Right.
within the body or a state of dissociation within the
Right.
body. And then on top of it, if you're doing something like that, at 3 in the morning, like put it all
The
together.
effects. Yep. Mhm. The effects are gonna go up the
And
roof. Yep.
the effects just, yeah, exactly. So, it's this ecstatic transcendence. That's how it's
Right.
being framed. And then also being framed in terms of a sort of meditative, almost submissive state to the teacher who's teaching it, with
Right.
this perceived idea that you're creating some sort of a greater power for yourself,
Mhm.
but that is kind of put on to the teacher or the teachings because, okay, so it's like you're feeling something in your body and it's like, oh my gosh, I've never felt like I'm high. Like
Mm.
you feel
Yeah.
high. And then you're saying, okay, and it's because of what this teacher is telling me to do. And so then it's like this, you're putting this submissive kind of like mediated power into the individual who's teaching it,
Right.
which, so that's what makes it, so you're in a state of awe, which then sort of creates this, you know, ecstatic and dangerous dynamic.
Mhm.
And then when that awe is sustained and then also socially reinforced by the fact that there's all these other people who are doing the same thing around you in the group within these
Right.
classes or workshops, that transitions into a state of fervor, which is
Uh-huh.
a motivational state that's characterized by devoting yourself in this energy. And then that ties in perfectly with the devotional or ritual practices within Sikhi. So it was sort of this braided, interwoven
Right.
system that got created. It had a whole, I mean, it was so intense in terms of this like emotional conviction. And,
Right.
using all these lines from Sri Guru Granth, you're thinking that you're having this moral elevation. So this is important because the idea is that you can either elevate there in that very narrow path,
Right.
or the alternative, so you're either rising in your destiny or you're falling into
Mhm.
fate. And then that
Right.
further makes this dangerous dynamic because there's now fear being brought in that
Right.
if you don't do these practices, you're going to fall into the, what do they say, like the dukes, right?
Yeah. So there's a guilt aspect also attached to this that
Yes.
they try to put inside you as
Yes.
well.
Shame and guilt. Yes.
Shame and guilt, yes. Now, you did talk about a little bit while we were discussing that how he didn't know how to read Gurmukhi, and how then the transition of him just teaching yoga went into, like opening up a gurdwara and reading Guru Granth Sahib and teaching that to the gore, as we say.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. So he was, I don't know the exact timeline, but I remember speaking
Okay,
with his wife, who the group calls BBG. I don't remember her full name, but so we'll call her
okay,
BBG. And she's still
okay,
alive. So BBG is back in Delhi in India, and
okay.
her husband now has been gone for a year or two.
Mhm.
Okay. And so she's like, "Hey, what's going on? How are things over there?" And he's like, "Oh, everything's great, you know." And so she's getting a little, she's kind of getting a little worried. And so without telling him, she gets a ticket to fly to the United States. So she
Okay.
gets to Los Angeles. He is teaching at some festival. I want to say it was in Florida or somewhere in the South at the time. So she then gets flown there to that festival to see him. So she shows
Mm,
up. He didn't know she was going to show up. And so it's this festival of music and hippies, and they're in all sorts of various states of undress, and doing various psychedelics and drugs, and having sex publicly and things like this. And
mm,
she's coming straight from India, and she is utterly shocked by
mhm,
what she's witnessing. And she's like, what are you doing?
mhm.
You're teaching these people? Like, what is this? So she immediately goes to, I could just
Okay.
imagine she's like, probably like, okay, I'm going to do 12 Sukhmani Sahibs today. Like, we got, like, I have to erase my mind of what I saw. Anyway, so she says, well, look, if you're going to be teaching these people, these hippies, you need to really teach them. So we need to set up a gurdwara. We need to actually, we need to get Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib in here. Like, we need to set this all up, and I'm
Okay.
going to start teaching them how to read Gurmukhi. And we're
Okay.
gonna start. We're gonna start in a Kanpat. We're gonna do all this. So she started teaching the yoga students,
Mhm.
as a way to, actually try to get them in line.
Okay. Okay.
It's like, if you're gonna, because he was bringing in these things, like talking about it a little bit. And so she was like,
Okay.
well, if you're really gonna teach it, let's really teach it. So they rented or bought, I think they rented a storefront in a
Okay.
neighborhood in Los Angeles. It was a furniture store from what I remember. And they converted the back of it into a little apartment, and that's where they were living. And the front of it,
Okay.
they converted into a small Gurdwara. And then eventually they also rented the unit, next to it, the storefront next to it,
Okay.
and that turned into an office.
Okay.
And then they built like an ADU in the back there as well. But that's sort of how they started there in
They
Los
started.
Angeles. Yeah.
Okay. So then basically she started teaching and then they kind of got more into that spiritual aspect and tied Sikhi more into it.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's so fascinating, like I said, from an anthropological standpoint. Like, why do the 3HO Kundalini Yogi people, why do they wear all white? For me, learning about all of this I was like, wow, this is so interesting. Because,
Mhm.
I met some friends through the festivals, through the 3HO
Mhm.
festivals. So they have like a winter and a summer festival they call solstice celebration.
Right.
And there always were, a few Punjabis who would come just to see what was going on, but also because there was this aspect, they would set up these gurdwaras at the
Mhm.
festival. And there was a lot of Sikhi that was happening. There was always a handful of Punjabis that would come from either the UK or Canada or elsewhere. And I got to know them through hanging out with them at the festivals. And then from there, I would go visit them. So,
Mhm.
like, I went to the GTA, and I was in Brampton and got to visit these Gurdwaras. And I noticed that only like the older aunties are wearing like the lighter right? The lighter kurti, or if you're the musician, right?
Right,
So
right,
if you're in this visiting jetta, maybe you're wearing all white, right? But
right, right.
everybody else is wearing, especially the women, lots of different colors.
Mhm.
And I was like, huh, this is really interesting. And my friend is saying, yeah, those are the only times you'll see a white pug, and nobody wears all white. But Yogi
Right.
Bhajan taught that if you wear white, it expands your aura because the white, right, is reflecting the light. So you're expanding yourself, you're expanding your, he called it the arc line. And he said this is
Hmm.
all in yogic science.
Is there actual science behind all this, or is just, somebody says it and people believe it? We really can't pinpoint it. You know what I'm saying? What are your thoughts on that?
Two parts to this. So the
Okay.
first is like actually like in terms of physics, white does reflect light. Okay.
Hmm.
The darker the color, the more absorption of that energy there is.
Right.
So from a visual, yes, I mean there is a reflection that's happening. Okay, sure.
Right.
But this is an interesting twist as well. And I think part of it, you cannot get away from this within this group. And
Hmm.
many people who were part of the group and who are still in the group, they shake their heads. They're like, "What are you talking about?" But I'm like, "No, we actually have to look at this." It's so baked in, this
Hmm.
idea of white being associated with purity
Hmm.
and then also like angelicness, this idea of heaven. So
Hmm.
those are all incredibly like this is Judeo Christian now that we're talking about ideology,
Hmm.
this idea of angels and heaven, but also
Right.
this idea of purity being associated with white and whiteness. That's
Right.
incredibly like colonialist. And
Right.
so
Right.
what ends up happening is that there's this extremely subtle, between the lines, yet very present idea of white supremacy that's actually
Mm.
part of and within this group. And it
Right.
appealed very deeply to the white hippies who were the core, the initial,
Right.
group that this group got built upon. Anyway, so that's a very long answer.
Yeah, no, if you look at it based on what I saw in the documentary, that just wearing white is somehow gonna make you positive or change your
Or a
thinking
supreme being.
or a supreme being,
Yeah.
but then on the contrary, what is going on behind closed doors? So
Oh,
how is that white, is that white making you do all this? Can you share what you saw that was negative in the group behind doors if briefly, whatever you can share?
yeah. So the documentary we're talking about it was produced by HBO. I was an
Okay.
associate producer on the documentary. And I'm also in the documentary, so you
Right.
can hear me talk a little bit more there. It's available on all streaming platforms. So if you wanted to watch it through Amazon or
Mhm.
I think there's a Hulu HBO thing. But anyway, it's called Breath of Fire, and it's a
Mhm.
4-part, 4-hour documentary. And it
Yeah.
does get into it just scratches the surface of some of the things that were going on within this original group. And then some of these sort of offshoots that are happening within that group now. So
Mm.
as I mentioned and hinted at before, Yogi Bhajan basically started having sexual relations with his students.
Mm.
And he was telling them that it was their duty, that it was part of their enlightenment, that it was part of their, supremacy, that if they slept with him was they were somehow, it was their destiny. And he tied it back in with some of his teachings. He had this thing that isn't mentioned in the documentary, these
Mm.
workshops that he would do called white tantric yoga.
Mm.
And he was saying that tantra was just a weaving of energies, so a coming together of energies of people. And this workshop is fascinating. It's you sit in these very rigid geometric lines, and then there are
Okay.
people who are there to hold space while you're meditating. And you meditate. You have a partner. There's a lot of eye gazing, which happens. So looking into each other's eyes, and then you basically hold these positions or hold these. Sometimes you'll be doing various actions, and
Okay.
those meditations can last anywhere from, 10, 11 minutes all the way up to like 3 hours at a time.
Oh,
But then
wow.
you get a little break. And so talk about going into an altered state of consciousness. I mean, you do get very delirious when you go into these meditations. But anyway, so Yogi Bhajan originally taught these meditations. So he would be sitting on a stage, and then later on, the stage would have a spotlight on him. So he'd be elevated in a light, and then the yogis, the group of meditators would be, there in front of him. So as he taught this for a couple of decades, but then one of the women that he was sleeping with, one of
Mhm.
his girlfriends, concubines, within his harem, because that's basically what it was. And they all lived together, like in the same house, and they would travel together and all that. And he would also make the women sleep with one another. And that was a power play. So he
Hmm.
would say, you need to give this woman an orgasm as a way of dominating over her, or he would make them have sex basically in front of him. And
Really?
he would bring in, because it was Ayurvedic teachings as well, sometimes he would bring in either small amounts of cannabis or nutmeg.
Mm.
I don't know if you know about
It's
nutmeg, but
interesting you mentioned cannabis because we have a group that's promoting cannabis into Sikhi as, but
bong,
let's not go
drink
into
that
the,
bong.
yeah. I guess we'll talk about that on another day and just have an episode just on that. But okay, you continue.
I mean, we know, like, look, like if you go to, I mean, I was lucky enough to get to go to an Anpur Sahib during Hola Mohalla, and I don't know the name of the fritters, right? Like you'll have like the chickpea flour with the
The
leaves.
pakode. Yeah.
They're the pakode, but with the ones that are made with the cannabis leaves.
Okay. Okay. I
Because
see.
it's growing wild everywhere there.
Right.
I remember the first morning I woke up because I was at the camp about 5 kilometers east of Anandpur Sahib. Friend of
Okay.
mine. It was a wonderful experience, I have to say. But anyway, so I'm with all these Nahangs, and one of them says, "Okay, let's walk into town." So we're walking the 5 kilometers, and I'm delirious because of jet lag and everything, and so. We're walking along the road and I start looking around and I'm like, are you kidding me? Because it was springtime, right? March.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everywhere was just growing all this cannabis plant. And I said, now I understand why it's called, weed or grass, because it's growing like grass. I had never
Right.
seen that before. But
Okay.
anyway, I think that, there is a cultural use for it. And
Mhm.
I think that there are medicinal properties to that plant.
Right.
It just gets very grossly abused, particularly in Western culture, and now we've hybridized it and all and on. Anyway, as you
Right.
said, a topic for another day.
Right.
But back to Yogi Bhajan and these disturbing things. So, again, this idea of bringing in sort of like different physiological states, different biochemical states. There's a chemical that can be released if you, again, if you cook it. And he had a couple of yogic recipes.
Hmm.
That's fascinating. I did I experimented with that a little bit when I was doing all of this Kundalini yoga and meditation by Yogi Bhajan.
Okay.
The chemical is very similar to MDMA or ecstasy. And
Okay.
my experience of it is I'm talking about nutmeg, like the spice, right?
Right.
You grate it. It kind of like coats the nerve endings, and then so it really enhances the sensation. You can really experience within the central nervous system and also the peripheral nervous system what's happening in your body when you're doing these various yoga poses. And that was really cool from my perspective. Now
Mhm.
I now am a doctor. I'm a licensed naturopathic medical doctor, so you know but even then, I had a real deep interest in what was actually going on in the body.
Okay.
So, okay, Yogi Bhajan. So, yeah, I mean, very sad and disturbing. He was sleeping with these women. And then as time went on, he was also grooming some of the younger women. He would pick out ones
Mhm.
that he thought were going to make. The pretty ones, the ones that had this sort of like, very sort of an empathic and devotional personality or spirit to them. And he would, kind of take them under his wing
Mhm.
and then, when they basically became like 17, 18 years old, he would start having sex with them and telling them
Yeah, it
that was,
gets.
their duty, that they were now on his staff, his female staff. So to finish and to tie all of this back, those staff, he then, so as he was getting older and sort of, slowing down a little bit because he had a lot of health problems, which
Uh-huh.
is kind of interesting as well, for somebody who's this great yogi. How did
Right.
he develop diabetes and why did he have to have all these surgeries? And anyway, so one of the students that he was sleeping with, she was also kind of aging and recognized, he wasn't sleeping with her as much anymore. So she was like, okay, he's he no longer has an interest in me, but
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna get something out of this deal. So I don't know, exactly how it went down, but she proposed that she would turn this white tantric yoga into a business and she would be
Yeah.
then the head of it. So that's what she did. And so in order to keep the current of the Mahan Tantric, that's what he called himself, the Mahan Tantric, this made up title that
Uh-huh.
he gave to himself. Anyway, in order to keep that going, they produced a whole bunch of videos of Yogi Bhajan teaching these tantric exercises.
Okay.
So the video would be playing on like a TV or a projector so that people could follow along during these workshops, but they still
Uh-huh.
needed to have a facilitator, you know, explaining the directions for each exercise and meditation. And so all those facilitators originally were Yogi Bhajan's staff or girlfriends, concubines, whatever you want to call them. So, and the idea there was that they were, because they had had this intimate, sexual relation with him, they could then reflect this tantric energy back out in, his Mahan tantric energy back out to the students. I trust that's making some sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, a lot of that, happened like in the Mandars as well, where the pundits would kind of say that, in order to touch that deity or that God is within me, you have to come and do that.
Well, and again, tying back to some of these cultural ideas, in South Asia and East Asia, there's this culture of, you have a teacher, you have a
Uh-huh.
guru, you have somebody that you study with and that you devote, this path of your life to.
Right.
We don't have that in European and Western culture, but he took that, this idea that I am the teacher and you need to have this complete devotion to me in order to learn.
That's what a lot of these new emerging cults in Sikhi are doing, where they're brainwashing the Sangat into saying it is us who has the secret, and nobody else knows about it. And you need to come to us,
Keep
so they
coming
make
back
them the
here.
prompt. Keep coming back here, right? Now,
Yeah.
one question I want to ask you, which was kind of just in my head, even after watching the documentary, why does it take this long, 20 years or 10, 15 years after he dies, to for the woman to step out and say, hey, this is not right? Let's say initially when he took a woman in a room, why wouldn't she, hey, this is wrong, I was in here for something else, but this is not right, and either walking out or telling somebody? What's the reason that's holding them behind, and then they keep on doing what they want to do?
So again, two things here. The first is sort of, you have to get into the psychology of sexual abuse and
Mhm.
any kind of abuse and trauma. So that's the first thing I'll talk about. And then the second piece is that several of the women were brave enough to actually come forward, but they were immediately silenced. They were silenced by the
Mm.
group. They were silenced by Yogi Bhajan and the power that he had through his social and political network. And there were several lawsuits starting even early on, but they were
Okay.
all settled out of court. And then due
Mhm.
to the group dynamics, the cultic dynamic of us versus them. Okay, so we have, the group and then everybody else, and this idea of shame, guilt, and fear kind of being the
Mhm.
glue that keeps you there within the group. Yogi Bhajan would then say, basically, there's always a story that's made up about somebody when they leave, when they
Mm.
become something else. And so many women did speak up, but they were shunned and they left. And if there
Okay.
was a lawsuit, it was settled out of court. There are court records as well that can be looked up online. You can
Okay.
read anyway. But, so with sexual abuse, one thing that can happen that is so great and painful that it's difficult the person is unable to process it all right in that moment. So
Hmm.
there has to be a coping mechanism, a compartmentalization psychologically in order to get through and get by. So you can have a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. So,
Hmm.
fight, obviously, that's somebody putting up a fight. Most sexual abuse survivors don't fight, actually. They don't.
Hmm.
They don't flight. So, some of these women, yeah, immediately, like after, he would touch them inappropriately or say something inappropriately, they would bolt, they would leave the group, they would say, oh my gosh, I
Hmm.
have to get out of here. That did happen. But
Okay.
most would either freeze or fawn again because he's teaching them, and it's tied in with this idea of, devotion, bhakti, right? With
Mm-hmm.
which is so twisted. It's this
Right.
perversion of this. You need to be devoted to me. So what they did in terms of the coping mechanism was this fawning or even catering to a hypervigilance to cater even more into the abuser and what they're doing. And
Okay. Yeah.
freezing is you literally just freeze up. But then the
Right.
group would say, okay, but you need to do this. So you're kind of already within this dynamic of the group. And all you have to do is basically what they say. Like I said, it's very plug and play. And the way Yogi Bhajan created, set up this whole group is he taught how to do everything. It was
Mm.
every aspect of your life. So every minute of your day, right? So what time do you need to wake up? Well, you need to wake up at 3:45 in the morning, right? Because that's Amrit
Mm.
Vela. You need to take a cold shower so that you start to get the peripheral nerves of your body activated so that you can have, right, like those beta endorphins in order
Mhm.
to, awaken and get your nervous system primed. Then you need to
Mm.
sit and you need to do this sadhana, right? That includes meditation and Vani and all the rest of this and on throughout the day. What you're going to eat, where and what kind of environment you're going to live in, which direction your bed needs to face. He said the bed needed to
Mm.
face east and west with
Really?
the cycle of the sun, the solar cycle, because the electromagnetic lines of the earth then the whole thing, like it just
Yeah. Like
every
these kind of things
aspect.
have nothing to do with Sikhi.
No, exactly. And then,
Right.
and maybe there is truth to them in terms of yogic science. I am
Yeah.
not somebody who has devoted myself as a scholar to studying the Vedas, the Puranas, like any of that stuff. And that's for another lifetime, right? But
Right.
so who knows what had some actual validity versus this sort of like melange, this salad, this
Right.
blend that Yogi Bhajan was just sort of like making up on his own.
Right.
And the thing is, he would teach something, and if something was effective, like if he
Mhm.
noticed that the yogis were having a really big response to it, let's keep doing that.
Let's
Like,
keep doing that.
so when I was transitioning out of this group and trying to understand what had happened to me, I started seeking out other kinds of meditation and yoga.
Mm.
And I went and I did some Vipassana, which is of a Buddhist kind of lineage. And you basically just sit, and then there's
Mhm.
meditation on the breath, but then ultimately the body. That sitting meditation, it's you're going into the microcosm of the what your body is experiencing, but it's very contained, and they're really like literally actually is a very calm and centered just by the very nature of it. That's what it
Mm.
is. Whereas what Yogi Bhajan was teaching was almost like a wildfire, like everything was very much up and out and burning and very like
Mhm.
wild, and it's almost this like crazy energy. And after going to a Vipassana and then trying to return to some of the Kundalini yoga, wasn't able to be around that sort of like very wild energy. It's very activating. But I
Okay.
think that what he was doing was continuing with the things that were activating, that were creating those kinds of body responses in people. And so that's kind of what became popular and sort of the central tenets of the teachings.
Okay. And I guess to kind of getting closer to the wrap up is when did you started to realize or feel that something is wrong, something is not right here, and what made you decide to step out of it? And I know, like, I saw your picture, you had the bug, the star, the khanda, and so what made you realize that this isn't the true Sikhi?
Yeah, and I thank you for acknowledging and asking that. It's a really important question.
Mhm.
And I also want to, acknowledge that yes, outwardly, like, well, and even internally, my appearance, the way I was presenting myself, right, like how I was dressing, I
Mhm.
was, I was following the 5Ks, right,
Mhm.
and I was very, very devotional. I was in this state of fervor, as you could say, like I was talking about in the beginning. Some of my Punjabi friends were very offended when I started speaking out about the group because they were
Mhm.
saying, now you're giving, this was my understanding because they blocked me, which was sort of upsetting, but,
Mhm.
they were saying, by speaking out, you're giving a bad name to, these practices of Sikhi. That's not, I am not, like, at all. Like, this
Mhm.
was an incredibly beautiful path, and
Mhm.
I really cherish, like,
Mhm.
all of the time that I spent at Gurdwaras and in Pot, and, what I learned, and the actual, I think the most profound spiritual, like, if you wanna call them, spirit, God, universal experiences that I had within my time, like, being with this 3HO group, were the ones where it was the quiet meditation, or, I would be so immersed in Bani that then throughout my day, I would have reflections of that as I was going about my day. So that state
Mhm.
of meditativeness with Bani. I guess I want to acknowledge the incredible power of Sikhi and the incredible
Mhm.
power of Bani and the realness that has, and that is completely separate from what Yogi Bhajan was teaching. So
Right, right,
hopefully that's coming through.
right.
Anyway, so a few things. Like I said, I had been visiting India, so now I had clothes that were not white. I had kurti that were different colors, right? And things like
Mhm.
that. So it was 2016, and I was deeply affected by the political situation that was happening in the United States. It was around Halloween time, so right before the election, the November election, presidential election in 2016, and I was at LAX, a very busy airport, and I had a panic attack while waiting for the flight that I was about to get on, a flight for a job that I had. And they wouldn't allow me to board the flight. I was incredibly embarrassed, and it just was a very jarring experience.
Okay.
And then I had another panic attack. And to put it into perspective, I mean, I'm seeing election, news coverage on all these TV monitors around the airport terminal, and it's literally, I'm going into a panic. So then I was at our, the 3HO Winter Solstice Festival, which was held in Florida annually,
Okay.
and I was heading up the team that heads up the facilitator for the 3 days of the White Tantric Yoga, which is sort of the center of this festival, okay?
Yeah.
And I am the head of that group, and I had a panic attack again. And that was incredibly embarrassing because one of the teachings of Yogi Bhajan is emotion equals commotion. Like, you don't have, like, you need to just keep everything in control. Like, that's the whole point. You're supposed to be this little, like, perfect, meditating angel. That's the archetype you have to fall into.
Right.
So I have a panic attack. That's like no bueno. And then also within the teachings, of Yogi Bhajan, you don't go see a psychiatrist. If there is a mental ill that's happening, any sort of mental dis-ease, you just need to meditate more. You just need to do more seva. You just
Mhm.
need to, go deeper into teachings. You need to change something here. So I had been doing that, right? And this is where it had led me. So I get on the internet, and because I was a researcher, I had actually at that time I'd been working at UCLA for about 5 years in research as well.
Okay.
But I found the Stanford studies where they did these cohorts. There were 6-week long studies where they were microdosing either psilocybin or LSD. Now, I'm
Mm.
not necessarily promoting, psychedelic therapy, but I found this, this is the end of 2016. And what actually the thing that got me most interested was that they did it for 6 weeks. So that's 42 days. Within the
Okay.
teachings of Yogi Bhajan, you have a practice for 40 days, 40 buddies of Japji, 40, like 40 days, 40 nights, Jesus Christ, whatever. 40. I saw 40 and I thought, okay, because Yogi Bhajan taught if you do something for 40 days, you can break a habit.
Mm.
And I thought, you know what? I'll give this a shot. I had a friend whose partner had some access to some homegrown magic mushrooms, and I met with her and she taught me how to microdose. So the idea is a sort of a sub perceptual, like you can still work, you can still drive, you can still, you're just ever so slightly kind of like creating a little bit of neuroplasticity so
Hmm.
that you can get out of the corner that you've gotten yourself into. And that's exactly what happened. I was able to kind of have enough stepping back from my situation that I could start to see with some perspective. This thought comes into my mind. Am I in a cult?
Okay.
Like, is that what's going on? Because so many people had actually said to me,
Mm.
I, this is a cult. Like, I think you're in a cult. And one of my friends said that she ran into me and I was wearing, pug and all white. And she said, this is a, don't you think you're in a cult? And I said, oh yeah, this is cult like, but it works. And I was in this kind of denial and I was so deep in the
Mm.
practices that, there was no one could talk any reason into me,
Right.
right? Even
What do
my
you
old,
what do you Yeah, what do you think led you to have those panic attacks or have that state of mind where you felt that you need to go outside and seek some sort of help? What do you think led you to that?
the cognitive dissonance. So there was a part of me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Waheguru, right? Like, thank God. I am so grateful that I'd had enough of a life and life experience and personal development prior to joining this group. So
Mm-hmm.
for some of the people who, join when they're 18 or 21 or 23 years old, they don't have even as much life experience prior to,
Right.
it's more difficult. But I had enough understanding and enough life underneath me that I could recognize that something maybe wasn't quite right. And all
No.
along because when so within a cult, there has to be there's a bypassing or an ignoring of there just like has to be by its very nature. So what we were ignoring was emotion, right? You're
Mm.
sweeping everything under the rug, you're ignoring that, you're just going to go meditate more and dissociate a little bit more. So you're not actually
Mm.
addressing any of the sort of like underlying, you're not actually processing any of the psychological stuff that maybe had sort of brought you there into that group in the first place. But
Mm.
there was enough of a part of me, a large enough part of me that I could recognize that something was not right with what I was doing. And I was doing everything according to the teachings of Yogi Bhajan. So if
Mm.
I was having these experiences and I was doing everything right, something was wrong.
Yeah.
So then,
Yeah.
and me being the researcher, being the scientist that I am, like I said, I started researching and then podcasts were just becoming a thing in 2016, 2017. And I started to find some podcasts on cults and cult dynamics. And I started listening to those and I found there was this wonderful cult deprogramming therapist, a
Mm.
psychotherapist, right there in Los Angeles where I lived, who had these groups, a group therapy session that met, weekly on a Wednesday
Mm.
evening. And so I reached out to her and I went to one of those sessions and I saw all these other people there who had also been in cult like groups, completely
Mm.
different than what the situation that I had been in. But, I just started listening. I didn't even talk at first. And I just started listening to them. And I, started to notice parallels from, on these podcasts and hearing these other people speak with my situation. And then slowly it was, I like the analogy of a Polaroid picture.
Mm.
So you take the picture, it's blank at first, but then it starts to come into focus.
Come
You
into focus.
start
Yeah.
to see what's really there. Or
Right.
like a puzzle, as you start to put the puzzle together, the picture starts to come to come together.
Mm.
And that's kind of how it was. It was a slow process over basically about 2 years after that. And it took a long time. Like I always I wore scarves around my head for a couple of years. I still have a lot of white. I have a whole white section of my closet that's just white clothes.
Mhm.
I like white, it's a good color, you know?
And just in similar aspect, a lot of our Punjabi community is now falling into traps of similar cults within Sikhi.
Mhm.
Whatever he was doing with yoga, the tantric, and all these other teachings from different ideas and mixing it and making it a part of Sikhi. And similar things are happening today in Punjab and across different countries where these gurus
Mm.
and these yogis. So,
Mhm.
yoga is good, for your physical health, maybe, to calm you down or something. But this isn't the way of
Right.
Sikhi to attain that enlightenment. But they're now bringing that in, just like Harbhajan Singh Yogi did, and they're manipulating the Punjabi Sangat into following their, I'm going to say cult, because it is a cult. It's not the pure version of Sikhi that Sikhi wants you to follow. What would you say to the Punjabi diaspora in Punjab and across different nations, different countries that are living and following such things? They're not realizing they're following a cult. They think they're practicing Sikhi. What would you want to say to them as a message from you?
So I think it's important to try to recognize first and foremost what are the basic aspects of a cult. Okay.
Mhm,
So usually there is a central figure, a figurehead, or teacher, guru, someone like this. Okay.
mhm,
And then there's always going to be a group dynamic. So you're within a collection of people that has that ideology of us
mm,
versus everybody else. Okay.
versus-
So there's that. And then within the group, there's usually hierarchies or a system,
mhm.
where there are certain things that you do that then keep you into kind of this, you know,
Caste system type of ideology.
almost. So,
Mhm,
like in the case of the group I was in, there was this euphoria state that was you're getting high off the practices.
mhm,
And then built in, there is usually, like we were talking about, some aspect of fear and tied in with that, guilt and shame.
mhm.
So you don't want to leave because it might be too painful to have to face and recognize those things that had been happening. So it's easier to just stay. So there's got to be some aspect of social control. So
How how would that be different from an organized religion?
it's a very good question, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Very good question. And some would argue that, the largest cult on the planet is, say, Catholicism,
yeah.
or one of these or some other religion as well. I think the thing about religion is that, or even, Christianity could be considered a cult, but
Mhm,
again, you have to look at where is the power and where is the control within a
mhm,
sect or a cult. There's usually a control and power dynamic that's taking away from the group, the people of the group that are
mhm.
giving to back to the group, and then there's some sort of organization or person at the, who then has like power and control. And again, looking through history, like I said, like you could look at Christianity as this cult because it was something that had incredible power and control over people. But I think that, with religion, it's something that's usually so large that it becomes more cultural to the point where people are not you know, distorting, bending, perverting aspects of themselves, like
Right.
sublimating or giving away aspects of their life, to the point where they're no longer
Yeah.
pursuing. Does that make
So
sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think kind of like in Sikhi overall religion, obviously the teachings of Guru Granth Sahibs is to liberate us from all these bondages
Right.
that society and these people are putting us on.
Right.
And then within the religion, different cults start happening because they're now taking that teaching, which was meant for our freedom, but they're actually controlling us and manipulating those teachings. And then different cults start emerging. Even let's say in Christianity, Jesus teachings might not be what they're teaching today, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, same thing, and
so
twisting and manipulating, like, words of the Bible, for example,
right,
s so that
right,
so that, somebody or some group can have power and control.
right.
And what was so twisted about, like, how Yogi Bhajan taught was that he taught us that we were healing ourselves or clearing
Mhm.
karmas or, bettering ourselves through these practices, that we were sort of somehow uncovering deeper layers of lifetimes of karma, whatever.
Yeah,
So we thought that that we were doing the right thing, and I think that when you're in a group like this, you really truly think that this is the way, this is the path.
this is
There's certain red flags, and there's lots and lots of podcasts and books and things. I really enjoyed the work of Yanya Lalich.
okay.
She's wonderful. She's written books and done many podcasts. I enjoyed the work of Dr. Yuval Leor. He talks about states of awe and fervor. But
Okay.
there's certain red flags, like I said, these cult dynamics, political polarization, conspiracy thinking, charismatic leadership,
Mhm.
emphasizing spiritual potential in terms of supremacy, us versus them, anything where you're, whether you realize it or not, right? This idea of being submissive in some sort of like
Right.
moral absolutism, cooperation, group
Mhm.
hierarchies.
Yeah, yeah,
And sometimes you can't see it. Nobody
yeah.
joins a cult and says, I'm joining a
I'm
cult.
joining a cult. Yeah, yeah. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing this. And hopefully, people are listening to this will start to think a little bit deeper about what they're following and who they're following. Because when I look at Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Granth Sahib frees us from following a particular person and gives us the freedom that you don't need. What you need is the true teaching, the Shabad, and then God is within you and you can experience God through the Shabbat, through Gurbani yourself. But when certain people, they manipulate and say, no, you need us to experience
Yes.
God. So
Yeah.
that's where they drift from the message of Sikhi, but people following because I guess people aren't doing their due diligence into actually looking into Gurbani and say, what is actually the message of the Guru versus what this person is telling me?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so important. This idea that the power is actually within each like us. I mean, yes, it's universal, but we are of that. But like you can read all these things, you can follow all these people, you can do all these yogic practices, you can go here, you can travel around the world, you can do all of this, but where is it going
Yeah.
to get you, right?
Where is it going to get you?
You have to come back to that essence and truth of what
Right.
is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I know I took a lot of your time. We did promise an hour. I think it's well over an hour
I
now.
could talk for days on this. So,
Thank you for giving us the time, and it was a pleasure having you. And hopefully, we will meet again and talk on a different topic.
yeah, lovely to meet you as well. And
Yes.
hopefully, the listeners will learn some things here. And if you want to learn more about me, I've done several podcasts, but
Okay.
I'm Dr. Jules. And yeah, thanks for the
Any
opportunity.
any final words for the audience that you would like to say?
I just think, and I've sort of already said it, but I think Sikhi is one of the most amazing and beautiful. It changed my life, and
Mhm.
I think that we can, like, we are, there is the ability, we do have this power to separate what's real from what's not, from what's good from what's harmful, and
Uh,
that healing is always possible. That's the doctor in me speaking.
all right. Well, thank you, and have a wonderful day. We'll
Okay.
see you next time.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ
ਫਤਿਹ
ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.